Think of Easter today. It is a holiday defined by a bright, sanitized aesthetic, pastel colors, chocolate bunnies, and joyful declarations that Christ is risen. The entire cultural event is built around the expectation of a perfectly happy ending. But the Gospel of Mark, the oldest account of the life of Jesus, doesn't read like a peaceful celebration. It moves at breakneck speed. The author blows through 3 years of history in the first few chapters, jumping immediately from one event to the next, giving the reader almost no time to breathe. Then, after relentlessly pushing the narrative forward, the author suddenly hits the brakes. The final chapters slow down entirely to focus on Jesus' last week, leading to a sudden, jarring halt right at the empty tomb. According to this original text, the first witnesses to the greatest news in history do not celebrate. Mark chapter 16, verse 8 tells us that they fled the tomb, trembling and bewildered. They said nothing to anyone because they were terrified. A dark, unresolved cliffhanger where the heroes run away in silence is an incredibly uncomfortable way to end a story of salvation. For centuries, early readers and scribes struggled with this abrupt cutoff. You can see a physical artifact of that discomfort in many modern Bibles. Often, a thin dividing line or a prominent footnote separates verse 8 from the rest of the chapter. The text will explicitly state that the most reliable early manuscripts completely lack verses 9 through 20. Sometime later, an ancient copyist decided they needed to correct the depression of the original ending. They deliberately added an extra 11 verses to tie the resurrection story up with a joyful, comforting bow. Which raises a massive literary and historical question. Why would the original author intentionally conclude a story of ultimate triumph on a note of pure dread? To figure that out, we have to strip away 2,000 years of polished theology and examine the crushing historical trauma those first followers were actually living through. In the first century, Jerusalem was suffocating under Roman occupation. The Jewish followers of Jesus desperately expected a Messiah who would act as a warrior king, someone to build an army and overthrow the empire. Jesus entirely ignored Rome. Instead of building a militia, he walked right into the city and launched a blustering systemic clique against his own religious establishment. Look at the massive scale of this stone platform in Jerusalem. This was the center of Jewish religious life, where pilgrims offered sacrifices. Jesus actively shifted the focus off this massive physical structure, claiming that he would replace its function himself. When his supporters realized he wasn't going to lead an earthly rebellion, their excitement collapsed. The same crowds shouting his praises on Sunday were demanding his execution by Friday. He was betrayed, tried, and brutally killed. By Sunday morning, the women walking to the tomb were completely broken. Their leader was gone. They were arriving simply to dress a corpse in the traditional way and mourn the permanent end of a failed movement. Arriving at the burial site, they found the massive stone entrance already rolled away. Inside, there was no body, no smell of decay, only a mysterious messenger in white telling them the tomb was empty. This diagram outlines the logical reasons for their panic. First, grave robbers stole the body. Second, physical danger from Roman soldiers. But these fears hold up poorly. There was no real motive for robbery, and Rome rarely hunted scattered followers after executing a leader. Their source of terror was existential. They were terrified by the possibility that the messenger was right. They were looking for a dead man in a place of the living. To the ancient mind, the idea that a deity would take on human flesh was strange enough. The concept that God would willingly subject himself to human death was considered utterly absurd, even deeply offensive. If the tomb was empty, then the absolute wall between the human and the divine had been breached. The resurrection forced a collision between human logic and a reality where death no longer had the final word. In Mark's ending, the women are witnesses to a fracture in the natural order. Their flight suggests that a raw encounter with the power of God is a shock to the system that outstrips any religious comfort. The cross served as a radical physical demonstration of how fiercely God loves humanity. It required taking on pain and punishment that didn't belong to him. But here is the theological catch. This gift of grace carries a massive calling. It demands that believers abandon a passive existence. If God loves the world this much, his followers are expected to live as Christ-like people in a world that rarely sees what Christ is like. The gospel presents a paradox. The news is good, but it removes the safety of our old lives. If the resurrection is true, we are no longer spectators. We are recruits. The ancient scribes who felt the need to fix Mark's gospel with a neat, happy ending missed the point of the original text. By ending abruptly on bewildered fear, Mark refuses to let his audience remain comfortable spectators. He denies us the easy satisfaction of watching someone else celebrate. This is the literary brilliance of the cliffhanger. The author drops the theological challenge directly out of the text and straight into the lap of the reader. Mark's gospel leaves the story open-ended. It presents the evidence of the empty tomb and leaves the reader to decide: flee in silence or pick up the cross.